got a
Yeah.
bunch that's a little bit different.
Norman Shabel grew up on the mean streets of Brooklyn, New York, and Brownsville, New York. As a kid, he was involved in gangs, and when he became an adult, he ended up spending 55 years practicing law in the courtroom. And it's fair to say, as a kid on the streets of New York or as an attorney in the courtroom, Norman has seen some of the worst of humanity. And we get into some of his life experiences and even some of his court cases on this episode of Unbeatable. I can't wait for you to hear from one of the Amway Dukes, Norman Shabel, on this episode.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Norman, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule, sir, to be my guest on this episode of Unbeatable.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to your people about our books and about our plays and about my life.
You've got an amazing story. I can't wait to get into more than 55 years of practicing law and much of it in the courtroom. I just got to know, I don't know what the record is in the United States, but you got to be pretty close to holding the record on the amount of time practicing law. Is that right?
You would be right. I don't know any other lawyer who has 55 years before the bar.
And of course, whenever you have that kind of experience, it will make for some pretty amazing books and some pretty compelling plays, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. But before we get into the professional life, let's talk a little bit about your childhood. Is that okay?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You grew up in New York, in the Bronx. Can you tell everybody a little bit about, and I think this will be important for our listeners, can you tell everybody a little bit about what life was like for you as a kid, especially as a minority growing up in New York City?
Actually, we started in the Bronx, but we wound up in Brownsville, Brooklyn.
All right.
We spent many, many years as a teenager there. Living in a city like Brownsville with one tree in the block and houses and all kinds of people living there, gangsters and women who walk the streets. And my life has been how I avoided all the bad parts and try to get the good parts of what they call. The street was called Amboy Street. In fact, there was a book written about it, the Amboy Dukes.
Amway Deuce or Dukes?
Dukes, Dukes.
All right.
It's a very big, fabulous book that was written. I forget the name of the author.
Were you one of the Dukes of Amway? Is that what that book was about?
It's funny about it because we had a gang there, and I was a very quiet part of the gang. I never hit anybody, but we were always protected from other gangs. There was several gangs in the area. So we had a little gang, not very bad, but we had a gang, and we didn't do much. But to survive, we had to get together.
Yeah. Well, so that's a part that I really wanted to hear from you. Growing up in kind of a Jewish or an Italian part of the community, I don't even need to, most of the listeners don't even need me to say this, but of course there's going to be a lot of racism, a lot of, religious prejudices, and you would have, grown up under that. Can you just describe some of those hardships of life in in Brooklyn and Brownsville, or when you were a child?
Well, in Brooklyn and Brownsville, when I was a child, was heavily Jewish. We did have Italian sections. If you went down to one end, and we had a black section as well on another end, but mainly my section was Jewish. It was people coming from the other country and coming to Brownsville. It had about 2 million people in it, and most of them were Jewish. Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow.
notwithstanding that it only held maybe 20 blocks, there was almost 1 million people in that habitat.
Good gracious. Yeah.
Well, give you an example. My family, which was 4 children and 6 people, lived in an apartment on the second floor, which was about 100 square feet for
Oh, I can't
three
believe this.
rooms. 3 rooms. I lived in one room with my sister and my brother in the same bed until
Wow.
until we decided we're too big for that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Talk about growing up in very tight living
Yeah,
conditions.
that's right.
Um, Listen, I have lots and lots of Jewish friends. In fact, I get a chance to travel to Israel, and I love the country.
Yeah, I do
Have
too.
lots of friends that are Palestinians, and I know that I can't help but ask this question. This episode is airing while there's still worldwide attention about what's happening in Gaza. And it fascinates me how, when there's a war in Afghanistan, or there's a war in the Ukraine, or when there's fighting in parts of Africa, people notice it. But when there's fighting in Israel, and in Palestine, it feels like everybody in the world, for whatever reason, chooses sides and gets furious with the other side for what's going on. And I can't help but think that a lot of that is just ingrained in people from the way that they were raised over many generations. I have some Jewish friends right now that say, Jeff, if you look at the way that the world reacts whenever Israel's military does something, it's very different than the way that the same people react from any other country in the military. And I've even gone
That's
out
very
there and
true. Very true. I mean, being Jewish, there's a in this world of ours, um, there's some kind of underneath hatred for the Jewish religion, and I don't understand it. Other than, if you're not a Christian or know about God, you're a Jew and you're something different, and I don't understand it, because looking at the history of Judaism, it's always been a a religion and a people that didn't go after uh, domination. They always try to live by themselves and live systematically
right.
without making enemies.
Yeah.
And I, that's what I hate, because the world didn't give the Judea the right thing, which the world should have done, like they're doing today.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking you this question because I'm doing the math and going back in time, and you would have been a child growing up in the Jewish parts of the big city right after the nation of Israel is established, right after people from all over the world are starting to move from countries that they've been, living in as foreigners for centuries. And many of them, because of the Nazi Holocaust and the end of World War II, decided to go to Israel. But a lot of them came to New York, and a lot of them settled in the city with you, which experienced some of the worst hatred on the human race has ever known. And you would have been growing up and as a child with a lot of people that went through that, lived through that, if my math is correct.
Well, I lived in a heavily populated Jewish area, so I didn't find too much hatred to me, because I would, like, I had lunch in the day nursery over there. Everything was very Yiddish, very Jewish. I played basketball in the local uh, house there. Um, but you found that I didn't really realize the hatred that many non-Jewish people have for the Jews until later on in life. When I became an adult and went out to the world, I found out what Netanyahu is finding out right now, that there's an inborn hatred of Jews, and there's no reason for it
Right.
except one thing: that Jesus Christ wasn't revered by the Jews.
Well, thank you for being willing to talk about this with me. I know that I didn't plan to talk about what's
All
happening
right. Well,
currently in
anything we
Gaza.
would talk about, that would be
But for the listener out there, for me, the reason I'm asking this is not just to describe the living conditions of your childhood, but it's more the kind of judicial system that you stepped into. So you decide to become an attorney, and actually you become a criminal prosecutor, and you spend a lot of time in the courtroom. And you represent people that are minorities, people that are typically on the, that society doesn't give traditional fair treatment to. I want to get into some of what you experienced in the courtroom, but before we get there, can you just describe why, as a child, you decided, I think I want to go practice law?
Well, as a child, I didn't think about practicing law.
Okay.
I decided before I became a lawyer, I was in several businesses. After I got married, I used to travel around. I went to Europe, I traveled, whatever it is. But I didn't decide to become a lawyer until I was probably about 18, 19 years old. I was working as a salesman, etc. And I found that be be candid with you that being a lawyer was a great occupation, and that if you're a good lawyer, you you can make a living, a very good living on it. So that's why I became a lawyer. Also, I became a lawyer because I felt that sometimes in our lifetime things don't go right, and the only ones who can correct them is somebody who can file a lawsuit. And that's why I became a lawyer, because I worked for certain agencies before I graduated law school, which helped people who can't afford a lawyer.
Yeah.
So I felt good about that.
Can you just talk a little bit about the kind of law that you practice? Because I've already said to the audience, you spent 55 years in, practicing and in the courtroom. What kinds of law or what kinds of cases did you generally
Well,
practice?
most of my cases were jury trials, uh, and it's uh, all topics were part of the cases, but most of them I were involved a jury trial, um, and it could be any topic involved on it. But I felt that that if I can get to a jury and explain to them my client's theory or he or she is doing, that my client will win the case. It's
All
like
right.
I used to be a basketball player, so I went to law school because it was like playing basketball in a way. You know what I
Law
mean?
school is like basketball. I'm writing
Yeah,
this
yeah,
down. I
it
can't
is.
wait to hear your description.
Well, I played several colleges basketball. I went from one to another. I played AAU basketball on the West Coast.
All
I
right.
became a second for. But the problem was I liked the competition, and I felt as a lawyer I can change things
Yeah.
for people, for myself, and for the people who come to me.
Well, certainly you get a chance to make a huge difference practicing class action suits, or you can even make a difference life or death when you're doing, criminal prosecution.
Yeah.
There has to be some pretty memorable cases that you were involved in. Can you share one or two of those?
Well, the one or two kids is a player wrote a class act, which was just in the just locally here, which involved poisoned water over. Yeah, it started in California and came east to us, and the play is about the case involving millions of people. My firm represented the the perpetrator of the poison in the water, and eventually we went in weeks and weeks of trial, and we eventually settled the case in the billions of dollars. That was my biggest case.
What was the name of the play that you're referring to? The play that was based loosely on this trial?
Class act.
Class Act is the name of the play.
Yeah.
You're a classy guy who can write a play called Class Act. Most of us
A
can't.
class act.
Yeah, all right. A
It was a
class act.
singular class. Yeah.
Um, Lawyers are exceptionally busy people, and you start to spend time putting some of your experiences from the courtroom into plays and books. In fact, you published 8 books. Is that right?
8 books and 7 plays.
So, what got you into writing screenplays? What caused you to start writing books? Because most lawyers have more work than they can get done anyway.
Well, I used to read a lot. I used to read uh, books and whatever it is, and I found that some of the some of the actions which I had, I thought would be good on paper, and that's when I started writing. I started writing the books maybe 40 years ago.
40
Uh,
years ago. Okay.
yeah, yeah, about 40 years ago, and it just went one to one to one until I wrote the 8 books, and then I decided to go into the plays because I was involved in Greenwich Village with a house there, and we put my first place on there. I just, it's just a great way to express yourself,
Yeah.
especially in New York City,
Well,
which I had one of my plays.
I have a couple of books in print, but have never written a play. I can only imagine what this felt like when you wrote a screenplay and somebody decided to, actually put it into, to make something of it. So,
Yeah.
can you describe one or two of those moments where you're sitting there and you're seeing all of your work literally come to fruition?
Well, the class act is one of them. The play there,
Uh huh.
which was just produced here in our JCC. It was also in New York City, off Broadway, and I had a 250 people in the audience, and a standing ovation after I yeah, yeah, and it was just great. I mean, I've never gone through it. I had something like that, and the audience just even just on the one over here, I got 4 standing ovations on the play. I mean, you
Wow.
can't beat that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that makes it all worthwhile.
You're
And
right.
and especially if they're willing to pay you a little bit for your work too,
That's
even
right.
even
Well, it
better,
always
right? Yeah. How about some of those books? I have a list here of just a couple of the titles that you've written and a little bit of the story behind them. Can you tell us about Four Women, that book, and the experience from the courtroom that kind of informed that book?
that's an interesting book. I really love that book. It deals with 4 women in Miami, Florida, living in a house together, who came from the New Jersey, New York area
Uh huh.
down to Miami.
Because it's a lot nicer in Miami in January, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there was a developer who happened to be a German, who was a Nazi eventually, who came to the States and he became a builder. So he wanted to extricate these 4 women out of it and not pay them. So I of course represented these 4 women against this developer, and we came out with a sizable several $1 million um, monies on it. But the lawyer was a young lawyer who drank a lot, which happens all the time.
No connection to you whatsoever, right? Young, handsome lawyer who drank a lot.
Or drank a lot, right,
Right.
right. And the lawyer there wasn't the lawyer you find in the nights. He was a lawyer who drank, who went after women. I mean, it was a, a guy who and he's looking to his law as an extra to get his any money he gets, because his aunt is the one who leads these 4 women over here, and he takes it over, and it tells about the negotiations between all these people, which are unbelievable. At the end, they all wind up going to Israel in a boat.
All right.
Yeah,
So it's basically Matthew McConaughey in Lincoln Lawyer meets, spy thriller kind of 1960s book.
Oh, Matthew.
Well, no, I was just talking about one of those famous movies, with one of those famous legal movies.
Yeah.
Um, you're when I look at your experience in the courtroom and then the time that you spend writing screenplays and books, it sounds like I'm talking to a combination of true crimes TV series meets court TV, and what really happens behind the scenes with lawyers and judges, and if we can be honest in this conversation, the judicial system that is not always entirely unbiased and not always blind like Lady Justice is supposed to be. Can you
Well, I
describe?
certainly describe it in my books and plays
Yeah,
that what you're saying is correct. See that the one element that a person who's who's getting sued or wants to sue somebody is to get the right lawyer, because there's millions of lawyers out there, and the question is, you get a lawyer who knows what he's doing, and that's a big thing. I mean, that's most people don't realize it until they lose the case
yeah.
that the lawyer wasn't up to snuff.
I've never gone through this process, but I have sat in the courtroom as a character witness for one friend at one trial. But for somebody who's listening right now who says, okay, you got me, Norman, I want to know, how do I get the right lawyer? What should I look for? Or what questions should I ask? What would you recommend to them?
Well, first of all, I would get recommendations from other people who've had lawyers and who were satisfied with those lawyers. Um, I, you're you're looking for a lawyer. It has to question him in the interview that you have and see what he will do for you. Understand? But the biggest problem for a layman is to know what questions to ask the lawyer, because lawyers all want your case.
Right, of course.
But the question is, what will he do for me? And so it takes the individual the right questions to ask his lawyer and be satisfied with the right answers.
Well, there you go for all of the listeners. God forbid that you need a lawyer anytime. Make sure that you interview a couple of people about the lawyer and then make sure you interview the lawyer. But the questions that you're really trying to figure out is, what will they do for you if they represent you? Can you tell us a little bit about the background that led to the book, God Knows No Heroes?
That's an interesting book. That deals. We had a rabbi who used to play games with women in New Jersey, and
So I'm going to pause you for just a second. So the book is a fiction book, but it's based on a real trial, is what you're saying.
Well, no, it's not, because
Okay.
I got him acquitted in my book. He didn't get acquitted because I
Okay.
wasn't his lawyer in real life.
All right.
He's convicted, and he's sitting now in a prison in Trenton, New Jersey. But in my book, I make him out to had a better image than he really had, because he was a player. And I go, not only I have him leaving America and going to Israel and back and forth, and the people involved in all this the book is much different than real life, because, as I said, he was convicted. I didn't take the case. Somebody else, a lawyer, who discussed it with me, but his son went against him, and the jury bought what the son said.
Wow. His son testified against his father.
Yeah.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the influence that your books have made. Obviously, when you have 8 books and 7 screenplays out there, you're going to reach a wider audience than you could ever have people coming into your firm to talk to you. Have you got kind of responses from people who have read your books?
Yes, I've had those, and I've had big responses on my plays as well,
All
particularly
right.
the ones standing ovations on the plays. And I've gotten people who've called me on my books, and we discussed it and go after that. But the books are really just now coming out to print, all 8 books. Yeah, it's my secretary's working on it, and we're just now coming out with the books, and I'm hoping that something with you, we can sell more books.
Well, that's what I'm going to do at the end of this
Yeah,
episode
I
is
hope
tell
so.
people how they can buy some of your books, of course.
But I tell you, you see, laymen who read my books are getting a picture of what the law is all about. They're getting a picture of what justice is all about, or the lack thereof. That's why in my books I point all this out to the reader, and it's like an education for the
Yeah.
non-lawyer reading my books.
Well, based on what you just said, can you talk about one of those cases that you were involved in that was very challenging and the law maybe was stacked against, or the law didn't necessarily lean in fairness?
Not involved in my books. You mean if I on my on my
Yeah, I'm just saying,
profession?
without divulging confidential information, can you just kind of talk about a particularly challenging case where it wasn't really fair and you had to play a crucial role in it? You had to navigate through that.
Well, I had one of my books in my professional. I was a prosecutor in Burlington County. I represented a woman who was raped, and the defendant was a retired soldier who came into our house and actually raped her. And in that book, uh, it shows the reader what what a claimant has to go through, and what the lawyers have to go through. It goes from the judge all the way down, but it shows the difficulties in proving a case. As a prosecutor, I had to prove he was guilty,
Yeah.
and which I did eventually, but it was a very difficult chore.
I never thought about this until you just started mentioning it. I can't imagine the challenge that woman had to go through to prove, that this was that she was raped, and then all of the challenges you had to go through to represent her and to prove that this happened, and how ugly and how painful that must have been for her, but also for you to have to hear all those terrible, the ugly truth of what happened.
But you have to understand that when lawyers and people go into a courtroom, they're faced with various individuals, such as the judge. Every judge I know has their own mind on it. Some of some of us are thinking about one side or the other side, or with politics. You know, so you always have to know where the lawyer has to know what courtroom is he going in, who's he going against. Um, he has to make a determination of what his client facts we want to present to a jury. It's a big thing. It's a process of that the lawyer has to go through, taking all these things into case. In other words, what's going to be favorable to your client's
Right.
patient?
I think I understand what you're saying, but for people that are listening right now that are saying, I don't really understand, why would what courtroom or who the judge is, why would that make a difference on how this case turns out? Can you explain that to them?
Yes, it does. The reason is the judge has great openings to do what he wants to do. Every judge is different. Some judges are very strict. Some judges are not strict at all. They're very loose. Um, Prosecutors, if you're a lawyer, the defendant, the
Mm-hmm.
prosecutors, they go against you. Some are good, some are bad. So all these things come in play as a lawyer takes on a criminal case, or by the way, even coming on into a civil case.
I can see now why I've never been in the courtroom, never, done what you did for a profession, but now I can see why you would liken it to the game of basketball, because there's a lot of people and a lot of
That's
players
so
on the
true.
court.
The competition.
Yeah, lots of
I get
competition.
to the competition of basketball, and came into law was a thing. It's like playing basketball in the courtroom.
I'm making this mental image of a courtroom as a basketball court, and you got
That's
the judge and the jury and the
hit it right in
prosecutor
the
and the
head.
defender and lots of players on that court. And what
Yeah,
happens
yeah.
next can get very complicated, or can get very one-sided.
Yeah, it's very true. The competition. The reason why I became a good trial lawyer is because the competition. I'm used to the competition when I played basketball from 10 years when I was 10 years old.
Yeah, you're used to guys throwing an elbow at you when you're going up
That's right.
for a
That's
layup, right?
And the referee doesn't even see it.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like playing basketball and you get an elbow and you throw, and the referee doesn't see it, and you're lying down there dead.
That's what it feels like in the courtroom some days.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
With 55 years as a trial attorney, you have to have some highlights, some moments where you feel like, I really made a difference. We really did a good thing in this case. Can you talk about one or two of those?
Let me see. Well, one of the cases, as I've already stated to you, was dealing with the poison water. I mean, that case took years and took much of my time in pursuing it, because there were millions of people involved, and there was a time sequence that we had to meet. Under the law, you usually have on a civil case 2 years to file suit against it on it, and we had time sequences, and all these things, and also this trying to get which vicinage to file suit, because you don't want to get to the wrong vicinage, which goes for the big guy, and watch out for certain judges also, because judges are different. People think that the black shirt on he's gonna, but that judge has his own thinking. Of course, he's bound by what the government has done, but there's a lot of leeway that the judge can do to make or break a case, and that's some of the things I had to go through.
It's just occurring to me as I'm listening to you. You have millions of people who have been impacted by the poison water. You have years of your life researching it and representing it. And there's a lot on the line. I can't imagine the levels of stress that you were under as the whole case is being tried, with that many people that are impacted by it at stake.
Oh yeah, well, it's not only my clientele, it's also the monies that the lawyers put up just to push the case.
Yeah.
I mean, the cost alone in that one case, we spent probably $2 million for experts on it.
Wow.
So the plaintiff's lawyer had $2 million out without making a dime.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's more like a business situation, but there's more at stake than going,
of course,
to Canarsie.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've had some pretty big wins in the courtroom, but I'm sure you've had some tough days. Can you remember one of those experiences where you said that was probably one of the toughest moments of my life? Is there one that stands out in your mind?
Yes, in one of my books, I put it in is the rape situation when I was a prosecutor, and the girl, in actuality, she was the 22-year-old soldier, um, was acquitted on the
Oh
rape, and
man.
I felt
Oh
so bad about it, and
yeah.
nothing you can do. It's not the quality of my legal situation. It's just that when you pick a jury, you never know what they're thinking.
Yeah.
So it that was one of them. Uh, there weren't many cases which I lost. I mean, I
All
was
right.
very no. I mean, I see the big thing for a lawyer is to get the right clients and the right cases, because you can't expend time and money on your own, because the client doesn't give you, unless he's paying for your way, usually on a contingent fee you get it when you injuries and stuff like that. So the lawyer is putting out 200,000 or 50,000, but if he loses, his client doesn't pay him back. And then, of course, his client, who doesn't like what the lawyer does, she goes to the ethics committee. And I mean, these are all the things that a lawyer has to be careful of.
Wow. Yeah. I can't even imagine. I've always said, doctors, they get a chance to see people that are physically at their worst. But it's occurred to me that lawyers and clergy get a chance to see when people are at their worst on the inside. You get a chance to see, unfortunately, some of the worst of humanity in what people say to you in private, confidential conversations. And some of the things that I've heard as a pastor will have devastated me, and they will stay with me for the rest of my life. And unfortunately, I'm not able to divulge that information to, you know, to make a significant change. And you've been through a lot of that. You've seen a lot of
I've
that,
been in the same boat.
unfortunately.
I mean, a lawyer can't divulge what the client tells them
Right.
anyway. That's in the law. You can't
Yeah.
do it. And you're right. Certain times you don't like your client because he's a bad person.
Yeah.
But you took the case and you continued on. Win, lose, or draw, you don't feel great. And it happens often. I mean, I practiced 55 years. Every client of mine wasn't a great client.
Yeah. Sure. You've been in this space for many, many years. Now you're, coming to the zenith of your life. What you're spending your time writing screenplays and books, but what are some of the things that you're really excited for in the future? What are some of the things that are really bringing you joy right now?
The plays and the books. I mean, the 8 books I wrote were covering all the litigation and legal points that would come up usually any place. It covers the base. It talks about lawyers, the bad and the good. And I like to convey to the world that being a lawyer doesn't mean you're going to be a millionaire. It doesn't mean that you're going to be satisfied. And that's what the eight books are about. And the 7 plays are mostly about my own life with my older brother Marty, and who wasn't the greatest guy in the world, but that's what I've conveyed in my books and my plays.
I want to make sure that the listeners just heard what you said. So there's a mom who's driving right now listening to this. You're saying that when people pick up one of your books, they're not just going to hear about the crime, which itself is probably fascinating, but they're also going to hear about the connection between the lawyers and the clients, between the lawyers in the courtroom, the judge and the jury. And they're going to hear the whole, or the analogy we're using is the whole basketball court. They're going to get the whole basketball court in your book, not just the crime.
You know, I don't know if I'm the first author to do that, but I put out everything that goes on in the judicial system in my books, bad, good, or indifferent. I put it all in a book. You can read my books, and then you can decide to go to ask a lawyer about something, and you know what he's talking about. See, the books talk about what lawyers think, and they talk about what lawyers say.
That is a valuable insight for anybody who's not familiar with the law, or with the way judicial system works in America. getting your book and getting insights into what lawyers think and what they talk about when nobody else is around them. As I said, sir, I was a character witness. I've only been really in the courtroom once in my life. I had a friend that was on trial for a very serious maximum security prison offense. And after he was convicted, they asked me to sit in as a character witness before sentencing. And I remember thinking to myself, this is many years ago. I love my friend. It's pretty clear from this case that he was wrong. But I thought to myself, I don't know if I could stomach sitting in a courtroom and listening to the kinds of things that I've had to listen to day in and day out. I can't imagine what that would do to my heart and how that would affect the way I feel about humanity. And you did it for 55 years. I can't even grasp how this may have, influenced you personally.
It's funny because even though I did it 55 years, I never immunized. I never became immune to all this crap that goes on in the judicial system.
I gotta know, how is that possible? Because for me, I would have become immune in the first week just to save my sanity.
Well, all I do is I tell the people, read my books. And
Okay.
If you can't stomach it, put it aside and go into a play.
Yeah.
Okay?
So if you're not able to handle the books, then pick up one of the plays, is what you're saying.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Or go to one of the plays, like a class act. It's 6 lawyers on one side, and they're fighting. It's a good feel. You see battling between two groups of lawyers, and the play that was over here was unbelievable. It was just terrific. I mean, standing ovation for four of them. And that's all we've ever gotten, standing ovation for a class act.
Well, if I were able to, I would give you a standing ovation right now for all that you've done for the judicial system in America, having represented people and having served the law for 55 years. But I do want to point people to your books. So I've read a couple of the excerpts from your books, and some of them, like the corporation or the Badger Game, sound like they're fascinating. If people are interested in finding a Norman Shabel book, where should they go?
Well, it's normanshabel.net.
Okay.
Or on your author's page on Amazon. I think
All right.
Yeah. If they would get the name and the book also. Books they get. I would say this, and of course I'm the author of it. Looking at my books, it really tells the reader what the judicial system is all about. It's a very complicated system that the non-lawyer world does not understand sometimes when they're caught in between. But I think reading my books, there's certain things there that a layman would learn about what it takes to get into a courtroom, what it takes to sue somebody or be sued. That's why I think the books are great.
Well, I certainly would consider myself one of those people that doesn't understand the legal system and often gets frustrated by the headlines of what I read after a case is over with. So I'm a guy who probably needs to read a couple of your books just to see how the game is actually played on the basketball court of law, not just the final score, that makes it into the news when the case is over with. You just mentioned that your books are available on Amazon. Are some of those books available in ebook format?
All of them.
Oh, they're all available in ebook. Okay, yeah. So here's what we're going to do. Because we want people to go to your website, because we want people to go to Amazon and get one of your books, we're going to buy one of your books and we're going to give it away to somebody who's watching this episode. We're going to give away a digital copy of one of your books. So if you're driving along listening right now and you want to receive a free book from Norman, I'm going to give you a free book. You have to stick around to the end and I'll tell you how you can get it. But for everybody, we're going to encourage you to go to his author page on Amazon or go to normanshabel.net and check out some of his books or some of those screenplays. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time, sir. And thank you for all that you've
Anybody who
done.
buys one of my books certainly can call me, and I can talk to them about the law and what they went through. I mean,
Wow.
I'm open to it. People who buy books and they don't understand because they're not lawyers.
Yeah.
Mostly lawyers buy the book because they know what's happening, but the non-lawyer has to look at it and say, "Wow, I never knew that."
Yeah.
It's a revelation.
Well, that's a very gracious offer for all of the listeners. If you get one of his books and you're fascinated or you have a question about something like that, he just offered a way for you to get some answers.
That's right.
And again, I just want to tell you thank you for the way that you've represented the law over 55 years. And I'm excited to pick up one of your books and check it
Well,
out.
thank you so much for your part. I appreciate it. I want to get the books out there, which they come because I think those kind of books are very helpful to individuals who are not lawyers. They know what the law is all about by reading the book. It's an instruction, and buying the book, they should enjoy it, but also learn from it.
Well, there you go. If you want True Crimes meets Court TV from a guy who's been there for 55 years, pick up one of Norman's books. And we're going to put in the notes to this show where you can find his books on Amazon and how you can go straight to his website. Again, thank you for giving me some time, Norman.
It was wonderful.
It's great to be with you.
Take
God
care of
bless.
yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, you probably heard the phrase that justice is blind. Well, after listening to the conversation with Norman today, maybe you, like me, are realizing a whole lot of what goes into justice, air quotes, in the courtroom has to deal with lawyers, has to deal with the type of jury, has to deal with judges. Maybe justice is a lot more like a basketball game, to quote Norman, than it is the lady with a blindfold holding the scales like we see etched in stone outside of courtrooms all across America and around the world. And I really didn't understand what courts are all about until I sat through a court martial for one of my buddies as a character witness, and the conversations in that room turned my stomach. Norman, I've got incredible respect for you, having sat through conversations much worse than that for 55 years of your life. And I hope for the listener that maybe you've been intrigued. I'd love to know what happened in a crime, but I'm even as interested in what happens in the courtroom and the jockeying back and forth between lawyers, the interplay with the judge, or how big of a difference a jury makes. Maybe Norman's books have piqued your attention. If you want to get a copy of his books, you can go over to normanshabel.net, or of course you can search for him on Amazon on his author page in Amazon. We're going to put links to that in the notes to this. But as I said during the interview, I want somebody to get a copy of his book for free. So for one member of the Unbeatable Army, that's our email list, totally free. We hope everybody signs up and joins the email list. But for one member of the Unbeatable Army email list, we're going to give you a free copy of one of Norman's books. If you're not already on that list, if you want to become part of the list, well, why don't you just simply go over to unbeatablearmy.com? Because you're going to get information about our guests and about the episodes that we do. But I also do a weekly newsletter, and it's just my thoughts about the episode and kind of what you've heard. That'll be delivered straight to your inbox. Like I said, it's totally free. So if you want it, just go over to unbeatablearmy.com. If you heard this episode and you're saying, man, there's a lot more that I would like to know, or there are other guests that I want to learn about, well, why don't you just go ahead and subscribe on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform? And I hope that you're also following us on social media. We are pretty much out there on all of the social media platforms. And if you want to find our social media accounts, just search for @Unbeatable Podcast on just about any social media platform, because you're going to get interactions with people that listen to these episodes literally from all over the world, from Sweden, from South Africa, from the Philippines, and from Brazil. So while you're on social media, you're going to run into some people like Sean Deem, who is our fan of the week this week. And Sean, the reason why you're the fan of the week this week is because you're so engaged and so connected on social media. But we also think you're awesome, and we want everybody else to know how awesome you are too. So thank you, Sean, for being so engaged with us on social media. Hey, for everybody out there, maybe you've got a story. Maybe something has happened to you in the past, and you've had to go through some incredible hardships. If that's you, and you want to share that story with the world, why don't you send me a message on social media and just let me know that you're interested in being a guest on a future episode of Unbeatable. I want to thank you for staying with us on this episode, and we'll bring you another amazing guest next week. So I'll see you right back here next week. Have a great week, everybody. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.